everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I am super excited to share with you guys my thoughts and opinion on the highlighter palette that Hourglass just relaunched. So as you guys know, this is the Ambient Metallic Strobe Lighting Palette. This palette retails for $64. So this palette was actually launched during the holidays of 2017, I believe, and it was a limited edition palette. It was such a big seller, they went ahead and relaunched it. And I actually didn't pick it up during that holiday. Back then in 2017, I really wasn't into highlighters. I didn't really start wearing highlighters, truthfully, until I started my channel. Once I started getting into highlighters, this is the palette that I've had on my bucket list. That is one palette that I would definitely grab if it came back into stock. So Hourglass went ahead and relaunched it. It's absolutely beautiful. We're gonna discuss so much in this video, and I'm gonna break it down really simple and very easy. First, we're gonna get into the differences between this palette and the ambient lighting palette. I know that several of you guys had asked me to what was the difference. So we're gonna get into that. I'm also going to apply it on my skin. For reference, I am a medium with a golden undertone. I will put some of my foundation shades in the description because I know that there was a lot of people that were curious if this would work for your skin tone. So I'm going to cover that, and then I'm also going to be swatching it next to a lot of different highlighters that I have in my collection. I wanted to pull as many as I could out and just swatch. I have some that are affordable. I have some that are high end. I really wanted to swatch this next to a lot of different highlighters, just in case maybe you guys already have some of these highlighters, because I did find a lot of similar shades in this palette in some of my other highlighters. So just for those of you guys that maybe have some of the highlighters that I swatched, then you might not need to pick this up. So before we head into the tutorial, let's go ahead and get into the differences between this palette and the ambient lighting palette. You guys have heard me talk about this ambient lighting palette so many times. I bought this palette, it's probably been 2 years ago now, and I use this almost every day. I would say I probably use this palette maybe 2 or 3 days a week. This palette has lasted a really long time. I don't feel like I go through it very fast. This palette, I feel like I've definitely got my money's worth because it's lasted me so long. And it's still the powders are still just as beautiful 2 years later as they were when I first got it. So I think that's the other thing. Sometimes you run the risk of, buying a $62 palette and, halfway through using it, it just doesn't look as pretty as it did when you first got it. Not this. This is still just as beautiful, several layers down. It's just as beautiful as it is on the top layer. So what I like to do with this powder is I like to do this as an overall glow. This is not a highlighter. This is more of a skin glowing type of powder where it's gonna give you just that soft glow to the skin. What I like to do is I like to just take my brush through all 3 of the shades. I do. And I like to just go all over my face with this. This is something that I use as a final step. And it's just one of those powders that just melts right into the skin, buffs into the skin really beautifully, and it will give this really pretty shine to it. One of my holy grail palettes. These are their ambient lighting powders, and they're meant for more of an all over glow. These strobe lights, these are actual highlighters. So these are the Amazing highlighter. You guys know I love this highlighter. It's one of my favorite highlighters. This is an actual highlighter that will, that you're not gonna wanna put this all over your face. You're gonna wanna put it on the high points of the face to emphasize the cheekbones or, the Cupid's bow. This is an actual highlighter. So that's the difference between these two. The thing that I will say about Hourglass, they have some of the prettiest powders, but the thing that I really think they need to work on is their shade range. Their shade range in their powders are just not very inclusive. I was worried about this palette working for me as a medium skin tone. So I know that as you get darker and darker, shades like this, they're gonna look ashy. They're not gonna look good on darker skin. So I think it's very important that Hourglass really needs to hear that customers are wanting more of a shade range when it comes to their palettes. So if you're gonna release something like this, why not have a darker palette to go with it for a darker complexion? it's kind of like it's 2020, you guys. Like we should have been doing it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and we just nobody was. But it's now 2020. Like they need to get with it. They need to get with the program. That's probably my biggest complaint when it comes to Hourglass. Hourglass, in my opinion, has some of the most beautiful powders out on the market. I don't have anything in my collection that makes my skin look so beautiful like an Hourglass powder does. Just don't like how they've completely disregarded a large amount of people that would love to enjoy their powders. So that's my biggest complaint when it comes to Hourglass. So that's the differences between these two palettes. Let's go ahead and move into the application portion of the video. I'm gonna apply it on my skin, show you guys what it looks like. Like I said, I was a little bit worried that this wouldn't work for my skin tone, but I'm actually pleasantly surprised that they melt into the skin beautifully. I'm just gonna say it right off the bat. This was definitely worth the wait for me. You're gonna be seeing me use this a lot. Like, I think this might be my new favorite highlighter. I'm stunned how seamless this applied. And like I said in the application, you guys will see that. Normally when I go in with a highlighter, I like to kind of like go in with a brush and then sometimes tap it out with my finger or like use a sponge to really like melt it into the skin, because I don't like seeing like just a stripe. I like it to really blend into the skin. With this particular formula, I didn't have to do that. Like it immediately blended right into my skin. And it was like, you couldn't see where the highlighter started and where it stopped. You just couldn't, it blends beautifully. Absolutely amazing. So far, in my personal opinion, this palette gets a 5 out of 5. But before you guys decide that you want to buy it, wait till the end of the video. I'm going to go through the swatches because you guys might already have shades in this palette in your collection. So we're going to jump into that after we get through the makeup tutorial. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the makeup tutorial, and I will see you guys in the swatches. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into this palette. I have been swatching it. We had a little issue with the power. I actually did my eye makeup with a little bit of lighting. We lost our power, and where I film, I'm in the basement. And so it was out for like 8 hours. And so I was halfway through my makeup getting ready to film when the power went out. It's actually 10:30 right now at night because I had to wait for the power to come back on to film. So anyway, I'm excited to dive into this. I have my full makeup on. The only thing I don't have on is highlighter. So this palette is really beautiful. I didn't expect anything less. Hourglass always has such beautiful packaging, and this is just no exception. It's a really beautiful palette. Overall, it's got really gorgeous colors, and yeah. I think what I'm gonna first do is probably apply like these on like my cheekbone, and then maybe apply this maybe up on my forehead, just so you guys can see what the texture and what the shade looks like. I'm gonna go into the first shade, which is called the Absolute Strobe Light shade, this one right here. Ooh. That is beautiful. Okay, now I want you to notice that like normally when I put my highlighter on, I have to go over top of it with like a sponge. Not this. Like this, I don't have to go over top of it to like melt it into the skin. It applies so seamless, and like you can't see where I applied it. Like you can't see any lines. Like it blended right in with the brush. I mean, look how beautiful that is. No, I'm gonna wipe this brush off just on a towel here. I'm gonna wipe the brush and give it a good scrub. Okay, now I'm gonna go into this shade right here, which is the Lucent Strobe Light. Gosh, you guys, that is such a beautiful powder. Wow. Oh, hot damn, they're pretty. Okay, I'm gonna wipe the brush off, and I'm gonna go into the middle shade, which is Pure Strobe Light. Let me show you how much comes off on the brush. So I'm gonna swirl my brush in here. You can see quite a bit comes off on the brush. So let's go ahead and put some just right up here, just to see what that shade will look like on my skin. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I thought that that shade might be a little bit too light for me, but I don't think it is. I really don't think it is. I seriously think I can wear that shade. I'm gonna put some right here on the cupids. These are pretty powders, really pretty powders. I might have gotten a little bit too carried away on my nose, but whatever. Can you see how beautiful that is? I mean, these are beautiful powders. So that's it for the tutorial. There wasn't much to it. Let's go ahead and jump into the swatches. We're gonna get into all of the swatches. I swatched this palette to multiple highlighters that I have in my collection, and I wanted to share that with you guys. And yeah, so let's go ahead and jump into the swatches. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the swatches of the palette. So let's first start with this palette compared to the new Scott Barnes highlighting palette. I know that a lot of you guys have this palette in your collection, and so I definitely wanted to compare it to this palette. So the shades that I felt like in this palette that were close to the Hourglass was the Pink Crush right up here at the top, and then the Twilight Sands right here on the bottom row. I will say the texture is pretty much the same. Like, they apply very beautifully on the skin. You get 8 shades for less money than you do the 3 shades in the Hourglass, so keep that in mind. So up here on the screen, you will see what it looks like next to Sugar Rush and also Twilight Sand. Twilight Sand and the Lucent shade are very similar, and also I think the Sugar Rush is a little bit more of like an icy pink, but very similar in texture though. I think that was what stuck out to me the most, was the actual textures of the highlighter were very, very similar, and even in the way that they apply. The next palette is the Jaclyn Cosmetics. This is the Flash palette. So I bought the one for like the light to medium skin. I know that she has one that's for the darker skin tones, and this one is the Flash. I wanted to go ahead and compare this because truthfully, when you look at them side by side, they look very, very similar. They shine the same, they look kind of the same, plus, you know, this is in this silver packaging. So this stuck out to me the most of being really comparable. I reviewed this palette and I really enjoy this palette. I think this is a beautiful highlighter palette. She did a great job on the formula. The formula in the Jaclyn Cosmetics palettes are made in Italy. Up here on the screen, you will see how it compares to the Hourglass, and it's very comparable. The formula is very comparable. Like, both of the powders blend and kind of melt into the skin very beautifully. So if you have the Jaclyn Cosmetics palette, I don't know that you need to rush out and grab this one from Hourglass. But as you can see in the swatches, they are very similar in the way that they look, and the shades are very similar. The way that they apply on the skin is very similar. She did a great job. That Jaclyn Cosmetics palette is cheaper. You get 4 shades versus, you know, the 3 shades. So there you go. Okay, so next up, I wanted to compare it to this palette from Dior. So this is the Dior Backstage Glow Face Palette. This one is in the 002 Glitz, and this is one of my favorites. I didn't love the first Backstage palette, but I love this one, especially this peachy shade. There's a big difference between this texture. This texture is more of a glitter type of highlighter, but still very beautiful. I don't really like glitter on the face, but this is one of the formulas that I do like on my face as far as glitter goes. It's kind of got a little bit of that sparkly glitter, but it's so finely milled that it just kind of blends. It's not like it doesn't have like a chunky glitter, which is what I don't like. But up here on the screen, you will see how it compares to the Hourglass palette. The textures are different, but the shades are kind of the same. I mean, there's a little bit of variations between them, but they're in the same shade family, but very similar. So there you go. So next up, I have 2 shades from Becca that are the highlighters. I have the Champagne Pop, and I also have Vanilla Quartz. So up here on the screen, you will see what the Becca Vanilla Quartz and the Champagne Pop look like next to this palette from Hourglass. They're very similar. I would say the Vanilla Quartz and the middle shade in the Hourglass palette, they're very close in shade. I would say the one from Becca is got a tiny hint of orange, not really orange, but a little tint of bronze, more so than the middle shade from the Hourglass palette, but they're almost the same. And then Champagne Pop looks very similar to the 3rd shade in the Hourglass palette. If you own Champagne Pop, you pretty much have this shade. Like, I was surprised how close those 2 shades are in comparison. They're really, really close in the way that they swatch. Also, I wanted to compare it to the highlighters in their holiday palettes. So the first holiday palette, we have one highlighter up here on the top row. It is a strobe powder, but it's not very pigmented. It applies beautifully, but it doesn't swatch very good. I would say this shade is just a very soft strobe powder. It's not as strong as the powders in this strobe palette. And then also I have the unlocked palette, which is this shade right here at the bottom. This is one of their strobe powders. This has been one of my favorite highlighters. I love this highlighter. As you can see in the swatches, the one in the strobe palette, the new strobe palette, I'm just gonna call it the new strobe palette. The one in the new strobe palette is a little bit more of a bronzy, just a tiny bit more than the one in this Hourglass unlocked palette. So I wanted to compare that just in case you guys have these two palettes at home. Okay, so next up, I wanted to compare it to the shade Cookie. As you guys know, I've been raving about the Cookie shade from Benefit. This highlighter is stunning. And I know it's my friend Mel Thompson's one of her favorites too. It's just a beautiful, beautiful shade. And they actually sell this in a single palette, but beautiful, beautiful shade. So I wanted to compare it in case you guys have Cookie at home. So the shade Cookie looks very similar to the first shade in the strobe palette. So they both have that beautiful pink, but also a little bit of the champagne vanilla into it. That's the one reason why I like the shade Cookie. Normally with my skin tone, I can't wear a pinker, I can't wear like a pink highlighter, but this one has a little bit of it's like a pink and a champagne vanilla toned mixed. And because it has a little bit of that champagne in it, I'm able to wear it. And that same goes for this shade in this Hourglass palette. So let's go into the two palettes that I have that are affordable. So I have this palette from Makeup Revolution and I've had it for a while. Really like the textures. The overall look of this palette is really beautiful, but the powders themselves are actually really, really great powders. I'm gonna be honest, they're good powders. So up here on the screen, you can see it's very similar. Very similar. The shade choices are very similar. We all know that Makeup Revolution kind of copies other brands. They've been doing it for a while now. I mean, you know, there's something to be said about it. Good and bad. In my personal opinion, if you're on a budget and you just cannot afford a $64 palette, especially with everything that's going on right now in the world, this is probably the closest affordable option that you're gonna find. The texture is very similar. I don't think it's as seamless on the skin as the Hourglass powder. So as you saw in the tutorial, it just seamlessly blended into the skin like no other. This is definitely, in my opinion, the best affordable option for this strobe palette from Hourglass. Okay, and then finally we have this palette from Flower Beauty. This is called the Shimmer and Strobe Highlighter Palette. And I actually really like this formula. It's a great formula. I like this palette. I think the highlighters blend really beautifully into the skin. And as you can see in the swatches, it is also very similar to this palette. Very similar. The only difference I would say is that these shades, for example, like this shade right here is more white than this palette. So like if you compared this first shade to this shade is a little bit more of a creamier vanilla with a little bit of a champagne. This one is definitely more white, right? This one in the middle is definitely more pink than you're gonna get in this shade right here. It's got more of a pink tone to it. And then here on the end, this is a little bit more of a gold than this is, but still a very beautiful highlighter palette. And as you can see, the shade is, in my opinion, not different enough to say that it wouldn't be a nice option if you didn't want to spend the $64. I definitely think the Flower Beauty and the Makeup Revolution palettes would be great options if you just did not want to spend the $64 on this palette from Hourglass. I think they're fantastic options. And as you can see in the picture, they shine just as beautifully as the Hourglass. My final thoughts on this palette, it's beautiful. I love the powder. I love the way that it blends into my skin. I knew it would because I do love the strobe powder in that Edit Unlocked palette. It's been one of my favorites, but you just never know. I think it worked really good for my skin tone. I think all three shades I'm going to be able to wear, truthfully. I hate to say it, but I don't think it's going to work for those of you who are tan and darker. I think it would be a waste of money. The palette is currently available at Sephora, and you know, it might still be available when the sale starts. It's hard to say. These palettes, you just never know. They sell out so fast. You just never know if they will still be available by the time the sale starts. This is a palette that won't work for everyone. I feel like if you're light to maybe medium tan, I think you'll enjoy these, depending on what colors that you like for your highlighter. Formula and the powders themselves, I mean, stunning. Absolutely beautiful. I think you'll love the way they look on your skin as far as texture and the formula, but it's just going to be, you know, whether the shade will work for you. But that's my final thoughts on the palette. I hope that this video was helpful for you guys. Definitely sound off down below in the comment section. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I will definitely answer them to the best of my ability. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me in the video. I love you all so much, and I will see you guys right back here tomorrow because I'm going to be telling you guys what I'm going to be getting during the Sephora sale. And I think you guys are going to be really surprised. I think you guys are going to be surprised. So come right back here tomorrow and let's chat about it. I love you all so, so much. Please stay safe and healthy and take care of yourself. I love you all, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye.